Welcome back to the Teach the Babies podcast with a special edition of Class. Today you will hear the first in a series of conversations connected to the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. This will be a conversation amongst brothers that is intergenerational, intersectional, and intentionally intimate, all including brothers who love Black people and desire for us all to get closer to freedom together. My hope is that you enjoy this conversation half as much as 30 years ago today, Black men. This is a conversation between brothers where we are making space for honesty, reflections, and dreaming, not trauma dwelling, but truth telling in service of transformation. By way of introduction, let's start by hearing from each of you, our guests today. I want to know, where were you in 1995? What did the march mean to you then, and what brings you to this conversation today? Reverend Mark Thompson, let's start with you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, brother, and long live the spirit of the Million Man March. Glad to be with our other brethren as well. I was there. I got there about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, having been up all night working on the final program. We finished with the program about 2 or 3 a.m. that morning. And I was asked to open the march as its MC, to call for prayer, which we did. And as I shared with you before, David, when we were in a holding room, Newt Gingrich and the Republicans and the entire congressional delegation, staff and all, just gave us the Capitol. They just let us have it. And we were in a holding room inside the Capitol. And then at dawn, I walked out, me and Brother Raheem Jenkins walked out the door to go to the podium. And we realized it was the same door, the very same door that the president walks out of the west front of the Capitol to take the oath of office. And that was a powerful experience. That was a powerful door. And at that moment, we realized we were walking out of the most powerful door in the world to go out and speak to Black men, to represent Black men, to be in service of two Black men, all of us one to another. And it was one of the most spiritual, most powerful experiences of my life. And the only time in history, other than when Christ gave the Sermon on the Mount, when people came, that many people came, not to promote themselves, not to promote any one political agenda, but just an agenda of humanity and love and harmony and atonement and reconciliation and responsibility. It's an experience I'll never forget, and I'm thankful to have been alive to see it.
I appreciate that. I also want to honor and acknowledge that the march was held on the day of your mom's birthday. And so I want to celebrate her and the ways in which she helped to orchestrate all that happened both then and now. In the spirit of humanity, love, reconciliation, atonement, and it being spiritual, Brother Bryant, where were you in 95?
I was on the campus of Florida A&M University. I was not in DC. The president at that time asked me to come and do a live via satellite for the students that could not go to Washington. So they brought all of the young men off the campus into the gym for them to watch it. And I was both the moderator and the speaker. At that time, I was a grad student at Duke University Divinity School, having just come out of Morehouse. I want to back up, Dave, if you don't mind, to your opening salvo, because I'm very charged in this moment because I was a part of that group, Mark, that went to churches around the country to mobilize churches and pastors to participate in the march. And I bring that to bear, David, because 30 years ago, you wouldn't have invited me to be on this conversation. My mindset, my language, and my thought process would not have been amenable to what this conversation brings to bear. And I'm really convicted by just in your opening remarks of it, and just taking a moment outside of the larger depth of what the March means, but to see my own maturation and development over these last 30 years of seeing what it is that I espoused over the pulpit of what a real man was and what a real man looks like and what a real man calls for is starkly different than my understanding of Black manhood in this moment. And so I'm having a bro mitzvah right now, seriously, just to see how time has changed and how the community in large measure has evolved. And so in that gym at Florida A&M, and then that night we did a healing service at Bethel AME in Tallahassee, Florida, for the larger community to come from men and women. And Mark, I'm a Morehouse graduate. I was a little on edge that a Muslim called it. And that a Christian minister didn't have that level of influence as a disciple of Dr. King. And so I was a little taken off. And at that time, contextually, and Mark would know, is when Dr. Chavis left the UCC church and joined the Nation of Islam and became a lieutenant in their ranks. I was actually torn, saying to myself, does this mean I'm forsaking Christianity for Islam? That I'm subscribing to a leader. That's what my headspace was. And again, remember, I'm a seminarian. So I'm grappling with all of my theology, and all of that is my first time in a PWI, coming out of Morehouse. So I'm having to wrestle with all of those issues, but to see serendipitously to be at Florida A&M and see thousands of young men hungry for leadership and hungry for direction and hungry to be a part of something significant bathed me afresh of reducing past me in a singular model of what is good for the larger community. And so I had a lot of things processing on that day as you have me now processing on this one.
I appreciate the candor with which you always show up. I'm going to talk about the man that I know, a man who loves the Lord and knows that the Lord that I know always showed up in love, and just say thank you for the radical candor. This is the kind of conversation we wanted to have when Reverend Mark extended this invitation. Before I ask some more questions to help us appreciate how you got over Brother Pastor Brian, I want to ask and invite our brother Sean into this conversation. I'm really interested in where you were in 95, but I'm also interested in how are you processing all of this? What I know is that there was not, while I celebrate Keith Boykin, who took up space for Same Gender Loving or Gay Brothers, we know that there was not an openly trans brother in that space. And I'm thankful for your legacy and leadership. Like, honoring that, how are you processing where we are as it relates to that march 30 years ago?
Well, first, I'm thankful to be invited to have this discussion. Too often, Black trans men specifically, are not included in discussions like this. When you asked about 95, my first thought was, wow, what was I doing in 95, right? My mom had passed the year before. I was 6 or 7 years into my transition, and I was really just trying to survive, right? There was no space that invited me to participate in the Million Man March. I don't even think in the community shared space that I was occupying at that time that there was even a discussion about it, right? But at the same time, it was me trying to define what manhood and masculinity would look like for me without having my father in my life, right? So, in some ways, acting out what I thought masculinity and what it meant to be a man. At the same time, trying to survive because didn't have employment at the time. That's a whole other story, but would not show up in the ways that they expected me to show up, which hindered how I would become employed. Right. So for me, what it was in '95. That year was just about survival. Right. And what would my survival look like knowing that my mom had passed, my grandmother was no longer there. I was raised by my grandmother. I'm the oldest. It's just myself and my brother. My brother was locked up, and I'm on my way to being locked up because I'm doing whatever I needed to do to survive. So I didn't really have a lot of buy-in for the Million Man March, but still understood its significance. But then in some ways still felt, you know, left out because that is a space that would never see me in my true self, right? That would never see me as I saw myself. So did it even make sense to attempt to be a part of, right? We in this community we do a lot of organizing for folks that won't turn around and organize for us. And in some ways that was that space. So for me it was just about, screw that. I'm not gonna participate in something that at the end of the day still doesn't see me. And if I outed myself, because I can show up like this and no one would ever know, but if I out myself, what am I subjecting myself to in that moment? So why even participate for what? So yeah, that's what I was, a whole knucklehead back then. But that's where I was in '95. That's what was going on.
And it sounds like there's a through line between where you were and where Pastor Brian was at that time. But keep going.
Yeah. No, I think there is a through line right there, right? Because in some ways we were both defining what masculinity was going to look like for us, right? And Pastor Brian already recognizing what it was and not being challenged on what it was in his world, and me not even having the space to identify it, because who do you go to have a discussion around what masculinity looks like if you're questioning if that's who and what you are, right? And how is it perceived or received? What's odd to me is we're having this discussion and we're saying it's about sexuality, but for me it was never my sexuality that was in question, right? Which is another reason that I didn't feel like I fit in certain spaces. For me, I've always been a man who loves women. I've got to this space in a different way than most men, but I'm always a man who loves women. So if you're having a discussion around sexual orientation, that doesn't fit me. It is how I became a man. That is in question, and I don't think we are nuanced enough to have that discussion, even in same gender loving spaces, because I can turn around and say, no, I see myself as heterosexual, and they'll all turn around and look at me like I'm delusional. So then I got to try to unpack why I think that way first before I get back to the point about what it means for me to be a black man in America.
The beauty about this for me, and I hope that anyone receiving this can appreciate this, is that all of us have an opportunity, and I would argue an obligation to learn. It's not lost on me that Reverend Mark talked about being there and learning in real time as things shifted, including what was supposed to be your speaking slot. I'm carrying you, Pastor Brian, naming you, talking about what a man is, looks like, calls for at that time in the evolution sense. And Sean, you and I'm appreciating the intergenerational nature of all of this. You and I think, are closer on the spectrum of chronology. I was not at the march. I was 12 at the time.
Yeah.
What I know is I had conversations with my godbrothers, my cousin JJ, who was a Morehouse man, grandpa, Kappa. He's the reason why I'm a Kappa today, in part. I know that I had conversations with them about what all of that meant, in particular because I also was searching for what it meant to be a man. And I'm thankful that we can have conversations about all of this, in part because there is more that unites us than divides us.
Yeah.
To conversations that each of us have had individually and that I know we'll have collectively. I want to go back to a thread in all of this, which is what makes a man. Pastor Brian, I want to go back to what you said in terms of you were invited to name this for folks, to offer up examples. Can you help us appreciate how you came into an understanding of what you were told a man or Black masculinity was supposed to be, and then how you evolved to where you are now?
Yeah. Is just the regimented old school Bible version of provider and protector, of one man to one woman. And I tell the story all the time, is that when I pastored in Baltimore one Sunday, my service, I had 3 services on Sunday morning. And after each service, I'd be at the back door, Sean, and hugging members as they're leaving, say, love you, see you next week. And the 2 young men, I hugged them, love y'all, see you next week. That's what I always said. And one of them said to me, you don't love us. I was like, yes, I do. So he was like, you don't love us, we're gay. And it hit me in between the eyes that I had been doing domestic terrorism,
Mm-hmm.
that people under my own canopy of covering didn't feel safe with their own shepherd.
Yeah.
And it caused for me to really do some internal investigation on what was my moral compass of gauging who God loves
Right.
as a divorced pastor and adulterer. And so,
Mm.
what was my benchmark and rubric of, of what the love of
When I
God
said
looked?
ouch, the pastor said when it hit you, say ouch. That's what I heard. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. So finding what is that standard of manhood, which was a Walt Disney interpretation of Leave It to Beaver, but did not really deal with all of the nuances and the complexities of all of the dimensions of Black masculinity, and how a lot of what we've done in the church was spiritualized colonialism and really put back on to our parishioners what had been placed on us in our own oppression. And so now it even makes me wince in this moment when I hear that language. I often, Mark, say it's amazing to me how many sermons we hear on same gender loving, but I've not heard one sermon from a Black pulpit about molestation. I've heard not one. I've not one. Notice how few, and I'm just going to throw it out here because all of us are in the realm of political science in one way or another. But you can count on your right hand with two digits missing how many pastors have asked for the Epstein list.
Yeah.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah, so you got a whole lot of sermons on Diddy, but very few on Dick Morris.
Huh.
So I think that we got to, if we came back, Mr. Farrakhan on that day talked about atonement, and that in order for us to get to that place, that repentance had to happen. And I think a deeper level of repentance 30 years later needs to take place for a lot of things that we've done by omission and commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the reality is, and it's a safe space, that I really think beards started in the church. It became a necessary device
Yeah.
for a lot of people while we accepted it in the choir loft, but you couldn't get through it in the pulpit.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
Let's stay in this space of truth telling. Reverend Mark, I see you
Well,
wanted to jump into these double dutch ropes. I'm wanting to know not only how this is landing with you, but when you're processing all of this through the prism of what Pastor Brian is sharing, I'm wondering what did the 1995 March get right about Black men needing space to gather, reflect, and as you shared, atone and talk about reconciliation so we could then move to where we address where we went wrong going forward.
well, first of all, just to follow on what Jamal said, bearding. Actually, Jamal, I believe that when Bill Clinton introduced the "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" policy in his first days of his administration, "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" was actually the policy of the Black church. That's where he got that from.
Mm.
That's how we function historically. And for that reason, I was blessed, and thank you, Dr. Johns, for mentioning my mother's birthday, being raised by a Black womanist and feminist who was also an empath. I was spared all of the discrimination and disdain for other groups of historically oppressed people that others had adopted from the church. In fact, the church I grew up in Nashville, Clark Memorial United Methodist, where James Lawson taught nonviolence during the Nashville sit-in movement to John Lewis and Marion Barry and Bernard Lafayette and Diane Nash and others. As a child, our assistant pastor, a Duke alum, Dr. Bryant, the first woman ordained in the Tennessee Conference of United Methodism, Dr. Karen Collier, was my assistant pastor as a child. I'm in the South, in Nashville, y'all. I come to Washington, D.C., to the city of my birth to go to college in 1985. And you know this, Jamal. In 1985, although she was assistant pastor of my church in Nashville, in 1985 in Washington, D.C., women were still not allowed in the pulpit. So, I got acclimated as a kid, not in the deep South, but in the South. It's more Southern than Washington, D.C.
Right.
I'm having a different experience. And I'm coming to D.C., wait a minute. I thought this was a cosmopolitan, metropolitan nation's capital with Howard University. So for those reasons, I didn't have the same indoctrination that was anti other people, especially who look like me, no matter what their gender or their sexual orientation was. But I know you want to talk about what we got right. This is what we got right, and I do have to mention in response to what Brother Sean Coleman said about what we got wrong. What we got right, and I want everybody to just remember the context. This wasn't so random. Dr. Benjamin Chavis had been chosen the president of the NAACP, and that in and of itself was a coup. Dr. John Henry Clark called me the night he won and said, brother, we have now had a coup in the NAACP because we've elected a Pan-Africanist and a nationalist. And that was the truth. Dr. Chavis' first act was to go to the Rodney King rebellion in LA and then to begin to recruit a younger generation, including a Jamal Bryant, into the NAACP. Now, also, it's very important to understand, and this intersects with you, Sean, and it's a shame we missed this because I heard you. You were dealing with your issues and surviving. We want to get into how you were surviving, but we know what folks were doing to survive.
Mm-hmm.
We went and had gang summits.
That's
Crips, Bloods, Vice Lords, Gangster Disciples in 1993, 2 years before the march, 93 and 94. The march was birthed from that because the priority at that time, remember, was to do something about the violence we were committing against each other as brethren.
Yeah.
Now, nobody thought to say, well, there are those of us out here that may be of a different sexual orientation who are having some of these same struggles in the streets. Nobody brought that up. That wasn't even contemplated because we weren't evolved enough to deal with it. And we wanted to keep everything separate. And homophobia was a real thing. That's just what it was. And so that's a missed opportunity. It was good that we decided to deal with peace and atonement in terms of the way we were treating each other, in terms of the way we were neglecting our loved ones and our families, and needed to take responsibility for that and reconcile. But what we missed was an opportunity to bring all of us together to address all of those complex issues. And the last thing I'll say is, even today, I was talking to some brothers not too long ago. Well, this is going to be Million Man. I know nowadays man means something different. And my immediate reaction, and Dr. Johns kind of corrected me the other day, and I love to hear more about this. I said to those brothers, as Jamal alluded to, we as straight men were atoning for our foolishness, including our violence and adultery and all the stuff we had been doing. That was our responsibility. And I said to the brother who criticized gay men and trans men, I said, I can't think of a reason gay or trans men would have to atone to black women. We mistreated black women in our relationships. And Dr. John, and it got real quiet then. I said, so, they didn't have anything to apologize to black women. We was clowning against black women and clowning against gay and trans men.
Yeah.
And Dr. Johns corrected me. He said, well, no, Mark, we actually as gay and trans men have something to atone for too. So I'm
in part because of the point that Sean made, which is we have relationships with black women too, romantic, intimate, platonic, and otherwise. So actually, I would love for Sean to tap in, if only on that part in particular. But I'm curious how all this is landing with you in a space where an underlying current in that was, I was saying to Brother Mark, that there's a cost to us not talking to one another. Yeah. There's a consequence to us not being in brotherhood with one another, if only that we miss things. And so there was this moment where Reverend Mark was like, look, shit, y'all weren't in this, right? Like, y'all are off the hook when it comes to atonement. And I was like, well, that's actually not true. If only because I know my own relationships with black women. And what you also have offered, Sean, is your identity as a trans man is different when we talk about queerness with regard to to gayness because you are in romantic relationships with women, right? You're in a what people would assume is a heterosexual relationship with women, but the ignorance gets us confused in all of this. But the point here being that we are in loving relationship with Black women in similar ways, and there are missed opportunities for us to learn from one another and grow in that relationship. That was the thing I was highlighting, and I was really sad about honoring or acknowledging that. How does that land with you as you process all of this in real time?
That is just a bit more information, right? Because just because I identify as transmasculine doesn't mean that I was a good partner to the women that I was in relationships with, right? I've done some cheating on my own, right? I've done some things that I wasn't too proud of either. And I had to evolve beyond showing up in that way. And I think part of it was going back to me trying to define who I am as a man, right? What masculinity looks like, or what does it mean to be a man? You asked that question earlier, and in the very beginning, what it meant to be a man for me was I could do what I want to do. I can say how I show up how I want to show up, right? Y'all gonna accept me the way I am, and this is whether it was aggression, whatever it was. I'm confident in how I'm showing up to you, right? And women were gonna accept the treatment that I gave them because it was all about what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do these things. But it was also about providing and protecting, right? And I've always been an excellent provider. So in my mind, as long as I was a good provider, I could do these things to my partner, to my girlfriend, whatever. So we also have some things that we had to unlearn and unpack and creating this identity, right? But going into it, it's like the pushback that I got was no. Providing and protecting, that doesn't make you a man. A penis, my friend. A penis is what makes you a man. And if you don't have one of those, I don't care about how else you show up. I can show up like this all day. I'm still missing something that does not make that in some folks' minds, I'm not equal because I don't have that. They'll never see me as a man because I'm missing that part, right? So again, 95, I'm dealing with, okay, so if that is what I need, and I know I'm not going to get that because there were things I could have done to get it, but we're not going to go through that process. And then why do I have to go through that process to be seen in my full self? I think it did more harm than good because now I'm overcompensating for my masculinity, if that makes sense, right? Because I know I'm deficient in that way. I got to show up stronger. I got to show up harder. I got to show up with more aggression. And I for a lot of years, I got in my own way because I wouldn't create like this type of discussion. I would have never had this kind of discussion in 95. I'd have looked at y'all like, what am I talking to you for? Because in my mind, you're already judging me. So there's nothing to talk about, right? So it was, there's a lot of atonement that has to happen. But I think in order for it to happen, we have to have these discussions because y'all don't even know what we need to atone for. Y'all don't even know how we show up. Y'all don't even know what's like the process by which I've gotten here, right? Because Pastor Brian, back to your point, I was not this evolved back then. It's taken a lot of years to get to this point to even be able to admit some of the things that I felt and acted out, and a lot of therapy to process why I acted out in those ways, where the aggression was coming from, right? Yeah, it's so much that I'm unpacking myself as I'm having this conversation with you because it's like that makes so much sense now. That is why you were so angry because society never allowed me back then to define who I was. And I'm screaming at folks through behaviors, bad and otherwise, because all attention is attention, whether it's good or bad. I'm screaming for this attention and I'm screaming to be seen as I see myself. And the more folks were resistant, the more I showed out. So there was still some atonement that has to happen. I probably still some ex-girlfriends I need to call and be like, I'm so sorry that I showed up in that way, but this is what was going on for me in that moment.
And I want to celebrate that you arrived at that moment in brotherhood, right? And what is not lost on me in this moment is us all understanding that division serves power, right? There's a cost and a consequence to us not being in loving community. There's a cost and a consequence to us not being able to have these conversations. And it's not just relational in that it affects our relationships with each other or the women that we love, but it affects our relationships with ourselves. I want to push on this in this moment. And there are two things that are competing in my mind. One is I'm simply wondering how this is landing with both of you, pastors, Mark and Bryant. But I'm also wondering if you can say more about the cost of all of this. Pastor Bryant, it's never lost on me when you share the story of engaging with your congregants, right? Being in a space with brothers who were told that they cannot be themselves, they cannot bring their fullness. It's fine if you bring your gifts and present them in the choir, but don't bring the person who loves you and enables you to manifest those gifts, which happens in the fullness of partnership in the same space. So in the form of two questions, it's like, how are you processing all of what we're working through now, honoring that we got to go through things to get there? And then what's the cost for folks who are not where you all are and being evolved enough to at least have this conversation and be reflective? What do we miss when we're not at a place where we can do this with each other as brothers?
I'll jump in. I would say that I often say to my staff, don't preach to the first two rows, preach to the balcony. Because so we got the buy-in to Martha's Vineyard and the Boule, but we missed it. So Mark talked about the prelude to the Million Man March was the gang summits, which I was blessed to be a part of. But what I tremble about, Mark, is it just dawned on me what was the dismantling or the undoing of the Million Man March was a year later with the East Coast West Coast rivalry of Tupac and Biggie. And I'm only triggered because of Sean's picture behind. So yeah, because I'm trying to
Symbolism
yeah,
matters. Total matters. Yeah.
I did the memorial service for both of them. And Russell Simmons brought me in. At that time, I became a national youth director at NAACP. And we did a East Coast, West Coast summit in Philadelphia, trying to bring the bear. And it brings to mind that we were excited Will Smith was there. We was excited that Jamie Foxx was there. But I think that we didn't do enough of the outreach to the corners that were necessary. And so I'll put it in church language. We were glad for people to walk down the aisle, but we didn't shut the back
But we
door. And
right.
so what needed to happen in the aftermath of the revival was discipleship. And I think that we needed more of a plan outside of that oral, audible covenant that we made that day from Washington all the way down to FAMU of making that vow of what we were going to do and be as men is really a different kind of championing. I say all the time, Dr. Johns, I wish Black people had the same kind of zeal and commitment that MAGA does. I wish the members of my church were as committed to Christ as evangelicals are to Charlie Kirk. To say, how are you not going to honor him? How are you not going to? It took, Mark is a better historian than I. It took, I want to say, 15 years for us to get a King holiday. It took 7 days for them to have a day of observance for Charlie Kirk. So I think that we've got to really galvanize and say that the dismantling or the undoing was not COINTELPRO. It was not white evangelical churches, but we didn't do the appropriate organizing. I don't know if any of you all saw the film One Battle After Another. Well, Tiana Taylor's film. If y'all haven't, y'all gotta go see it. It's the best movie I've seen in a long time. But it shows us how well organized supremacists are and how reactionary we are. So, David, I'm a preacher, so I'm going off the point, but I'm coming back.
No, you're not. The ancestors don't always guide you. Order your steps and your
Yes.
tongue. You right where you
You know
need
what I mean?
to
So
be.
we're looking at in real time what's happening in Chicago, that the president says that the black mayor of Chicago should be arrested. We're watching
That was
in real
massive.
time that Memphis is about to be invaded. And Washington, Mark has been a one-man band, trying to redirect traffic another way. But the reality is that we are watching the full goulash of a civil war unveiled right before our very eyes. And we don't have a plan. We don't have a strategy. Black women showed us how to get a million black women on a Zoom. So it may not be to DC. I'd be scared to bring brothers to DC right now. But how do we bring us together to say, hey, our inner cities are under attack, black leadership is under attack, and embarrassingly and woefully, the black church is silent.
Yeah.
And so this revolution is going to be a grassroots mobilization that we're not looking for the historic organizations to lead the way, not looking for the mainline denominations to lead the way or the D9 that most of us are a part of to lead the way. But it's going to be a real homegrown effort, and we can't afford to be reactionary. The reality is, we are having this conversation tonight, not under Clinton or Obama or Biden or Bush. We are having this under a Trump reality. And under that Trump reality, then we've got to expand that conversation of what Dr. King calls the urgency of now. So, in conversations that I'm not a part of, David, so that we don't repeat them, is what are we saying about these camps that the president is now saying is authorized to open back up, even though they're proven not to be effective? So all of these conversations, I think, bring to bear for where we find ourselves in this moment. I'm sorry for going
I,
off.
no, don't
Yeah.
be sorry. I appreciate the bridge and you underscoring the urgency of now, and to bring brother Uncle Jimmy, James Baldwin into the room, the fierce urgency of the fire, not next time, but now. And it has me thinking about again the reality that the militarized representatives of the occupant who propelled down from Black Hawks into a Chicago public housing building at ungodly hours of the morning to hogtie children and elders and American citizens did not discriminate based on sexual identity, gender orientation, or expression, right? They treated all of our bodies as marked by the stigma of minoritized status or simply celebrating that some of us have skin that's been kissed by the sun. I want to channel that energy and shift into solutions. So as you process all of that, Reverend Mark, what is the opportunity for us to grow from the reflection of 30 years, of the benefit of 30 years of reflection? How does the acknowledgement that we as Black men don't benefit from division, it is those in power, those who benefit from the tyranny of minority who do. How do we take that lesson and grow from it in this moment, given the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington?
Well, first of all, I really
Sorry, not the March on Washington, the Million Man March. Both important, but I want to be precise.
No. Thank you for that. You're right. Well, first of all, this is a wonderful discussion, and let me commend you all and just give you a little advice. When someone says you don't have to atone for anything and absolves you, you don't have to admit that you do have to atone for something, but you all are gracious and generous enough to do so. And that's important. And the fact that we come from different experiences, but still as men know that we must atone, take responsibility and reconcile. I can only imagine the brothers listening to this say, wow, we do have more in common than we have differently. One, I think we build on that. So we know more than we did 30 years ago. I think we all admit that. We've all grown and matured. All of us have in many ways. And so what is a threat to justice for any segment of our community is a threat to every segment of our community. And so we look at the president and the military and ICE. We look at Black men being targeted overall for disinformation and division and confusion. Black men being targeted by algorithms to participate in misogynoir and homophobia and transphobia.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are happening. And we also must understand that if we are standing up for the family, folks, we're not just talking about our immediate biological families either. We have a duty to stand up for the entire human family, first of our own as African people, our village. And there's never been a time when we've done that where others have been excluded. So we can't afford to be divided on anything, on any topic. We must
Mm-hmm.
defend one another when it comes to this fascist, totalitarian regime that we're dealing with. And some folk are still shocked that it's going on, but it's real. And so whether it's ICE, whether it's the women in our lives having their bodily autonomy stripped away. And let's face it, before Barack Obama endorsed marriage equality, a lot of black folks and a lot of folks in the black church still weren't there. But first black president makes a difference. And that was a solid move that transformed people, and it's become something that's more accepted. Know this now. This Supreme Court, as much as likely as it will harm voting rights even more this very week of the Million Man March anniversary. In the near future, we all must know and be prepared for it to reverse Obergefell and that. So we can't just.
Which provided for marriage equality for those who don't follow the Supreme Court because you live in.
So just as Jamal was saying, well, what is the church doing? Well, first of all, we got to stop acting shocked that I can't believe this. Stop. Expect it and prepare for it. And if we are really doing what we ought to do in our churches, and to be clear, folks, the church has always been, for good and bad, for success and failure, our most consistent and strongest political institution. And so if we don't get ourselves together, we can't fight these battles. We can't win these battles. We must come together now more than ever, especially as black men, not at the expense of black women or anyone else, but black men of all experiences, to say we will defend our people. Our goal, our unified goal must be, in the words of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, to replace white supremacy with justice, period. That must be it. And so we must defend black men from the criminal justice system. We must defend black men from transphobia and homophobia. We must defend black men, and that includes our brown brothers, because it was a time when you came from the DR, Brother Sean, and you could pass if you had a Spanish accent, you looked like you from the DR. And there was a time when coming from the DR and places like that and coming from the Caribbean, we identified with each other, African Americans and Afro Latinos and Afro Caribbeans. Now what they're told to do is don't associate with African Americans. Don't do that. So we've got to get back to the place where we know we are all in this thing together. And the last thing I'll say on this point, I meant to say it earlier, Jamal mentioned it before. The minister called for the Million Man March as a Muslim. And Jamal's right. There were a whole lot of black preachers who were mad. They were mad. And some of them even thought, I won't name the names, who were prominent, said he's going to steal all the black men from the Christian church and from the Baptist church and the AMEs and make them Muslim. That was a paranoia that was real. And some of those paranoid folks, and we lift him up on the week of his birthday, Jesse Jackson Sr., they went to Reverend Jackson. Don't go, Reverend Jackson, don't go. And Reverend Jackson was under a great deal of pressure not to participate in the Million Man March for all of those reasons. And not only did we see how it was evolving, it was organic. Men were organizing and making plans to come. And the majority of those 2 million men were not Muslim. So in the days leading up to it, Dr. Johns, I ran into Reverend Jackson Airport. I'm still in my 20s. And this was a mentor to me. But I took the opportunity to mentor to him. I said, Reverend Jackson, if I may be so presumptuous as your protege to give you some advice. What? I said, this is bigger than all of us. It's bigger than one faith. I said, Reverend Jackson, if you don't go to the Million Man March and speak, you may not be relevant in this next generation. And I had the boldness to say that to him. He looked at me.
Wow.
And then we got on a separate plane. Yes, I did, Jamal. You can ask this is true. And cell phones were just popular then. So as soon as I landed in my destination, we went separate ways. My phone is blowing up as soon as I turn it on after I get off the plane. We weren't even texting like that then yet. And it was Reverend Sharpton. Mark, what did you say to him? He's coming now. I said, I know. I told him that. And even the minister said, Reverend Jackson gave the greatest speech of the day. And to your point, what can a million men do? That was his refrain. Call and response. What can a million men do? We can care for one another. We can end the division and the violence against one another. We can build our communities together. We can take care of our families. And studies have shown that black men, even if they aren't married to the mother of their children or living in the home every day, they are more involved
Yep.
in the lives of black children
Yep.
than white men. And Dr. Johns, we talked about this too the other day.
Than any other group of men, to be precise.
You remember this too, Jamal. God bless, rest his soul. Dr. Leonard Dunston, National Association of Black Social Workers and the Black
Yeah.
Family Summit. He made a challenge that said too many of our children,
Mm-hmm.
black children, are being adopted, Sean, into white homes. And that changed. Black adoptions and black foster homes skyrocketed after the Million Man March. We need to continue to do that. And let me tell y'all something. It's nothing wrong. We got to get over this stuff. If there is a same gender loving parental home that can provide for black children who have nothing, that's okay. Because God blessed us to be not only the first civilization on earth, but some of the most beautiful people on earth. And we are loving people. We can provide. We can do all of this. That is what we must continue to do. That's the legacy that we have to hold up. We have to take the pledge again to one another and decide that we're going to continue to rebuild ourselves.
Yeah, this is good. Matthew 18:19-20 says at the end, for where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am among them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not lost on me. The thread throughout our conversation that as African descendants, as original curators of cool, as the original influencers, we also have linked fate. What happens to one of us, in spite of our socially constructed differences, affects all of us. None of that is lost on me, that we have the power to gather, not just in 1 million, but I think the receipt is there were 2 million brothers gathered 30 years ago. A 250,000 of those brothers registered to vote on site. And so we know that when we gather, powerful things happen. Brother Coleman, I'm curious in your answer to that question, what can happen when a million brothers gather, honoring that you are doing this work and you have a unique moment to speak at this pulpit some 30 years later. So honoring all that you know based on your leadership at Destination Tomorrow and the statistics about our community that include Black, trans, and non-binary young people. Nearly 60% of them consider suicide. 1 in 4 attempt suicide in any given year. Black LGBTQ youth are overrepresented among them. 40% within the homeless are folks experiencing housing insecurity. I could go on and on and on, right? What we know is that most of us are overrepresented in the lowest rungs of quality of life ladders. Knowing that and the power of brotherhood, the power of these relationships, what would your message be? What would you be asking a million brothers to do in this moment right now?
I want to take one step back, right? Because we were saying about how originally it was about gang violence, right? And we're having discussions around gang violence, and that's what initiated these discussions, right? And which actually led to the march. And what's on my spirit is, how do we have a discussion with black men around violence and not include the fact that black men were violent towards their gay and trans siblings, right? So I think in this moment it gives us the opportunity to have that discussion because it still happens, and it gives us the opportunity to want to atone for it, but approach it in a way that we all got to be vulnerable, and we all have to take a moment to acknowledge where we fell short and where we continue to fall short, because this is a unique space in that you're allowing me an opportunity to share what my lived experiences are. It doesn't often happen. So how do we create safer spaces? No such thing as a safe space in my opinion, that's just my opinion, but how do we create a safer space where folks like me, and I'll grab as many brothers as I can to say, hey, our sibs are they're receptive now. Bring the message now. They're ready to receive the message. Is there space for this Million Man March to be receptive to their transphobia and homophobia, right? And changing language. The second thing is I want our elected officials and our religious leaders to start messaging differently around transphobia and trans violence, right? We've allowed crazy folks to completely grab the narrative around what it means to be trans. So even our siblings don't completely understand us because my platform's not big enough to reach the folks that I need to reach. You can. So the message that you now have to put out is, hey, that's Brother Sean. He's a man of trans experience. Hey, let's have a discussion with him because there's some commonalities that we share and we should be and could be working together. When we talk about the Supreme Court is getting ready to hear a case about conversion therapy, right? I believe Colorado is bringing it. I'm not showing that, but
You're right. That's accurate.
Around conversion therapy.
Right.
And it looks like they're going to side with Colorado.
Again.
And what does that mean for black, and I say black people because I love us, but what does that mean for trans people, right? How does the states now come back in and say, oh, we will no longer allow you to identify like that. And as a matter of fact, if you continue to believe that that's who you are, you're delusional. And because you're delusional, we can now come in and whatever therapies they believe we should now have. We are in danger. But again, my platform is not loud enough for me to amplify that danger. I need someone else who can, I don't want to say step aside, but create
pass the mic. Someone who can pass the mic, who can shine the light.
Because what oftentimes happens is folks in our community will hear, oh, they're getting ready to rescind conversion therapy. Oh, those freaks need it anyway. They delusional anyway. Because they don't get the opportunity to sit and talk to someone who's of trans experience.
Right.
And the media has allowed folks to believe that, like, when they talk about the bathroom bills, did you ever see anybody like me, in that discussion around trans people going into the bathroom? No. And it was done on purpose because they know if they'd have shown me going into the restroom with your wife or your daughter, if you're talking about protecting people, let's be honest, like, you're doing us more harm than good because we have not been able to create a platform where we can tell our own stories. And I'm hopeful that a Million Man March will include an opportunity to have shared voices, diverse voices that historically haven't been heard before.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that I'm gonna end with, when it comes to the church and most trans people, many of us are still traumatized by the experiences that we had in the church. Yep. And one or two folks can come about and say that that's not what we think anymore. But until I see changed behaviors, and not just from one person, but that entire culture, right? It's difficult to get a message through. Now, I love the Lord, and I know the Lord loves me. I'm a child of God, and I know that. And no one can ever tell me that I'm not. But there's messaging that will make me believe that that's not the case. And again, the pastor may be coming out and saying one thing, but if your congregants are still believing the hype or what they've heard, I can't go in there either because it's not a safer space for me. So what does creating these safer, because I honestly believe the church is the foundation. My grandmother brought me up in the church. That's the foundation. That's where the organizing happened. But if I don't feel safe going into that space, how do I organize? How do I find community? How do I find family? And if I'm genuinely looking for family, I need somebody to continue to extend the olive branch as many times as you may have to, with the understanding that we are deeply traumatized by some things that have happened to us in the church.
Yeah, I want everybody to be clear that religious trauma was added to the DSM, the manual that psychologists associated with the American Psychological Association use to treat us with regard to mental health, at the same time that the assumption that people who are queer, trans, or gender expansive have dysphoria and that makes us crazy was removed from the DSM. So we're talking about actual real things, not just things that are imagined. And my brother, leader, Pastor Bryant, I know personally that you have evolved in this regard. You started this conversation inviting us in and declaring the work that you've done in this regard. You preached at Bishop O.C. Allen's church, which everybody should know is LGBTQ affirming. And have also said that your own church, New Birth, is a love church, not defined by who it excludes. I'm wondering in this moment how you're processing all of this, and if you can say more about what you witnessed by way of what's possible, right? Like what's possible when congregations lead with the kind of love that Sean is describing or grow in the way that you've declared. What's there for us to look forward to it when we put down the ignorance and fear
Here is
that
the
can often be
reality, Dr.
suffocating
David,
for us?
is that this is the lowest amount of Black people in our history in America who go to church. We're down to 27%. This is the highest, Sean, number of Black people who self-identify as atheist, 8%. Between now and the end of the year, 15,000 churches will close in America, Black and white, whether that is because of economy or technology. You are seeing all of the data come in from Pew Research that says that Gen Z is looking for something spiritual that they have not seen, that they've got a thirst for it. And so I think that churches have an incredible opportunity for revival in reinventing themselves without compromising themselves. Of saying that this is really the manifested love of God, and this is what love looks like outside. And so I'm excited about the untapped potential that the church has because the LGBTQ AI community is open to forgive. The question is, are we open to repent? So I think that it takes on both sides. So it may not be a million men, it may have to be a million pews that takes place, that the church calls ourselves together to
Mm.
really reflect what the love of God is supposed to look like, and then how do we move forward. As one of you intonated moments ago, I think it was you, Dr. Johns, is when the Black Hawk helicopters come in at all hours of the night, they're not asking you about what your preference is. They're not even asking you what your citizenship is.
That's right.
Right. And so we've got to figure out
Yeah.
how do we get on the same team so that we don't shoot each other in friendly fire. I have been in this
Mm.
fight against Target for the better part of this year. It would be delusional and irresponsible of me to not reference before I got in the fight against Target that many sectors of the LGBTQ community did. And let me say forthrightly, 8 months
Yeah.
in, I've had no conversation with that community about joining forces. We're, we're both talking about diversity, equity, and
Mm.
inclusion. So it's not even, Sean David, a 30-year mark. We're dealing with this
Yeah.
in real time, that we've got to really talk about the power of unity and what does
Yeah.
real cooperative economics look like, or do we just save that for Kwanzaa? If it is real cooperative economics, it's got to be reflective in all that we're doing. Sean, don't laugh. In all that we're doing. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
You laugh
what
because
we're
it's
doing
real.
all the way
Uh-huh.
around. And
That's
so
why you
when it is
laughing.
that the
Yeah.
president just days ago sent briefs to 9 universities saying, get in with the program. If not, you're going to lose the funding. And so that does
Mhm.
not just
Yeah.
impact Black students, but it also impacts LGBTQ AI students as well. And so I think when we're talking about the banning of books,
Yeah.
when we're talking about the hijacking of curriculum, when we're talking about the firing of professors, that's across the board. And I think that we've got to have a much larger conversation rather than
Yeah.
operating in silos.
I think that's right. Reverend Mark, I saw you nodding in affirmation, and I want to honor that you've organized every major Black freedom movement event for the last 4 decades, from the March on Washington anniversaries to Bloody Sunday commemorations to the Millions for Reparations movement. When you think about the next 30 years, what's the objective that should be anchoring all of us? When you process the conversation that we've had, this invitation that you've extended for us to be intentional in our intersectional opportunities to link arms and aims, in the words of our dear sister, Susan Taylor, what's the one thing that you want to call the community to do as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March?
Go back to our roots, do what has always worked. We have whatever freedoms we have because of what we have applied in the past. All we need to do now is expand it. And as Jamal said, I'll put a more drastic point on it. If we don't do something, our greatest institution, the Black church, is going to die
Yeah.
because people are being taken away from it. They're being
I like it. I approve this message.
algorithmic. I just made up a word. Away from
That's what we do. That's what we do.
Yeah. I mean, we're being moved out. So it's only practical that the Black church has to expand its base and its horizon, because we need a place where we can go and seek shelter and organize and work together. And it starts right here with the four of us. Because what do? We all busy. The four of us are four of the busiest people in the whole wide world. It's even hard for us to come together. But we have got to decide to set the example to continue this dialogue even beyond this 30th anniversary
Mm.
between Black men of all kinds and sorts. Is also, and this is important for the church to understand,
Wow.
this is the 50th anniversary of James Cone's God of the Oppressed. And the American Academy of Religion is having a whole section on that during its Thanksgiving conference. I'll be there. Dr. Cone included LGBTQIA in the God of the Oppressed. And so the church got to remind itself, the church is not for folks who are just doing all right all the time, or who have survived, or who have gotten to a station in life where they bougie. The church really has to be a place for those who are the remnants to come, for those who are oppressed to come and have fellowship and seek understanding and relief and organizing and education and mobilizing. And so that's really where we have to go. And that's that, be it our churches, be those, we talk about the church, but there were a lot of mosques and imams 30 years ago who weren't feeling this diversity either. All right. So let's be clear. It's not just a Christian, a problem of Christianity. People have come a long way. I give that credit, but we've got to keep going because we are all we have. And so whatever we can do to address these issues, Dr. Ron Walters left us with the working definition of self-determination. God rest his soul. Self-determination is a people's command of control of their own spiritual destiny, their own cultural destiny, their own socioeconomic destiny, and their own political destiny without any external interference from any external forces. And that came in the advent of the Million Man March because groups outside of our community decided that because Dr. Chavis had brought the Congressional Black Caucus and Minister Farrakhan and Dr. Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King and the Pan-Hellenic Council and the NMA and the NBA all in the same room, people outside of us said, we can't have that unity. We can't have Black folk meeting like that. And then that was what began his removal as the head of the NAACP. Don't be fooled by any other story.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get back to that and how sacred it is for us to come together. You read from Matthew how sacred it is. It's not just happenstance. It's not just random. How sacred it is for us to come together in the way that we came together 30 years ago, in the way that people have come together around Target. Jamal hadn't had to knock on every door. Look at the beauty of this. Black women organically, it's like they just got it right away from day one. We not going to Target no more. We get it. We tired of giving our monies. So something has been working. Somehow the message got through. We didn't have to pull a whole lot of teeth when it came to black women, just like we didn't have to pull a whole lot of teeth 30 years ago to get black men to come to the march. We have this within us. This is the genius of our culture. We can do it again. We must come together in unity, and we must continue these dialogues beyond this 30th anniversary and beyond this week.
Without equivocation, to that point, to those points, rather, to be precise, I want to celebrate that there is a group of Black, queer, trans, and gender expansive men that helped me conceive of this format. And we will produce a subsequent series of discussions that will build upon this base. So, shout out to each of you. I love and appreciate you. Similarly, I want to acknowledge being an unapologetic member of the Mama's Boys Club and the We Love Black Women Who Love Black People Club. A particular acknowledgement to our sisters, Tamika Mallory and Nina Turner, who are co-conspirators with Pastor Brian in the Target Fast and who have done a lot of the work that made it such that that has been our experience, Brother Mark, right? That it was just easy to turn that switch because like Joe Edie, who you mentioned earlier, in raising a lot of money for Kamala Harris and then building the blueprint that other people use, it is Black women that pioneer things that we benefit from. The last thing I think I want to name in this point is that it's important for us to do this labor, the labor that it's clear that each of you have done and are continuing to do, including through this conversation. Thank you for how you've shown up and moved through it. For the labor that each of you do in your work and at home. I'm almost certain, Sean, that I heard our new baby
Yes.
Get on record and
Yes.
co-sign a part of this conversation earlier. That fills my soul, honoring that that's who we do this for, right? Anybody who knows me knows that I care deeply about teaching the babies.
Yes.
And in this moment, I'm thinking about young people who are watching us right now, the 12-year-olds, as I was in 95 in Inglewood, California, or Chicago, in the Bronx, in Atlanta, or in a town without a popular name, who are trying to figure out what Black manhood means and what brotherhood looks like. What I feel anchored in this moment is that we are modeling that, or at least what's possible for them. I want to invite you all, by way of closing, to answer the question, what are we teaching the babies? And maybe precisely what's one concrete commitment that you are making, something specific, actionable, and connected to what we're discussing, that will change the way we have this conversation 30 years from now. Brother Sean, why don't we start with you?
I think I am committing to show up in my authentic self, right? When all of these discussions started about the trans community and how we're terrorists and those kinds of things, for a minute it was like, okay, am I more concerned with safety or do I need to continue to get my message out, right? Because I openly identify. But is that a problem? Me openly identifying. Am I putting myself at risk by doing that? And I think my commitment is to continue to show up as my true self, right? To continue to tell these stories, to continue to lead by example, to continue to push the envelope, to continue to occupy spaces that folks don't believe I deserve to be in, and to bring in as many folks, put my foot in the door and bring in as many folks as I can in those spaces. That's my commitment, and to always be a listening ear, right? And sometimes a closed mouth, so I can honestly hear what folks are trying to say to me. And lastly, to always show up in love, even if I don't understand where you're coming from, if I don't necessarily agree with where you're coming from, to always show up in love. That you can always trust that Brother Sean loves you, regardless of where this discussion is getting ready to go.
I believe you and appreciate you demonstrating that. Reverend Mark, what about you? What are we teaching the babies and what's your commitment?
Well, first of all, we have to save our children's lives when it comes to them knowing themselves and loving themselves. And we lost a lot of ground when we weren't able to institute African-centered curricula in our schools in the late 80s and early 90s. And now what do we have? We have our history being erased from our babies' knowledge. Imagine how well our babies would do in the STEM fields if they knew they came from a civilization that created STEM. Imagine what that would do for their self-esteem. So we've got to get into that. And as people have heard me say ad nauseum, I can't talk about our babies being in school without going back to school myself. And so, as the doors, as Dr. Brian said, as the doors of the church are closing more and more, as many as 15,000 even this year, and this is white churches too. As those doors are being closed, I've taken up the mantle to learn more about what we must do as a people of faith, even outside those four doors. What are we supposed to be doing outside in the streets and along the barricades to educate people about the Afro-Palestinian Hebrew who changed the world and who was a political activist,
Jesus.
and how we apply what we learn from that, and how we build on educating, organizing, and mobilizing. And lastly, how we emulate the Jesus Christ of our time, Dr. King, who gave us the tools and the template, the 4 steps in the letter from the Birmingham jail that we need to institute in this moment of fascism and total. This is not in the abstract.
That's
The
right.
world is under attack by a fascist. And a lot of folks think they're going to wait it out. I've said to people, we still act shot. He's not going anywhere. He plans to stay as long
Yeah.
as he can. So we need to be prepared for that. And we're going to have to put aside those who are God's oppressed people. We're going to have to put aside some of our differences to stand up and do what's right. Dr. King said, we won't have to answer for the violence and the hatred of the
Yeah.
children of darkness. We'll have to answer for our own, the fear and the apathy of all of us, the children of light. Let's not have to answer that. Let's continue to organize. Let's go beyond the commemorations, the anniversaries, the singular events, but let's find ourselves in spaces on and off the air where we can have these frank conversations. And in the words of Kwame Ture, organize, organize, organize.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. My sermon notes would read, "Let's not suffocate in silence." That's the lesson I'm drawing from that. And what's not lost on me is you honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we would not have in the form in which we were gifted him if it were not for his relationship and brotherhood with Bayard Rustin,
Mm-hmm.
who taught us and taught him nonviolent civil disobedience, who was his chief confidant, speechwriter, godparent to his children, confidant to his wife. Again, it's an affirmation of the importance of brotherhood. Related to that, and celebrating the opportunity that faith institutions have to appreciate that the work, capitalized and italicized, happens outside of those four walls, outside of that exchange on Sunday. Among the things that I appreciate about the work that you are leading with a whole lot of labor and love, Brother Pastor Bryant, um, we'll frame all of that as contextually appropriate and give the last word to you, which is,
a churning
how is all
black
of this resonating
churches
with you
into
when you think about
sanctuaries.
how this might show up in the to
Where
your
do you feel
congregation?
safe
What's the
for
charge that you will
diaspora
leave with them?
immigrants? We not mentioned unprotected and vulnerable brothers and sisters from Jamaica, from Haiti, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from the Congo, from the LGBTQ. How do they feel safe in our sacred spaces? How does the Black church become sanctuary for those who are not getting a appropriate, proper public education? I am challenging Black churches to have a library, Dr. David, of banned books. I am challenging our Black churches that Sunday school should not just be coloring Noah's Ark, but really understanding where it is that we are in terms of coding, where it is that we are in terms of technology, and where we are in terms of learning. I say to the babies that I take a responsibility to raise up in the Black church men who are not just stoic pillars of
Mm-hmm.
strength, but also models of vulnerability, and that our vulnerability is our strength. And I am strengthened our conversation today, not from data, not from quotes, but from heartstrings that have come out in this conversation.
Mm,
And to model to the babies that being a man also means being vulnerable. And your greatest level of toughness is vulnerability. And so that's what my takeaway and what my charge is.
I love that. I paused to allow my 12-year-old self to process that message and to reflect on how different the journey might have been had I had the opportunity to receive that message. Honoring that I have a lot of superpowers, being a descendant of Africans, that not being one of them, I'm thankful for opportunities like this to sit in a safer space, to be reminded of what happens when brothers gather with great intention and in love. And I'm thankful for many of the lessons that I will take from this conversation, among them, including having heard that the cost of exclusion isn't abstract. It's young people without shelter, safety, or the affirmation that they deserve to live as a consequence. I heard that rigid masculinity doesn't protect Black men or boys. It constrains us and keeps us from being vulnerable, from building the intimacy and trust that we need to organize and thrive. And I've heard that repair is already happening wherever brothers choose to lead with love and to expand boundaries rather than police them. And I'm thankful to each of you for these lessons. What I know is that the 1995 March asked Black men to atone. And 30 years later, we're saying atonement requires repair, and repair requires us to expand, not police, the boundaries of brotherhood. The work continues, this conversation continues. And to everyone watching, I'm asking you, what is your commitment to exploring radical possibilities? Where will you show up differently in service to our collective mission? Throughout October, Million Man March anniversary events are happening in cities across the country. Find one, join one, or create one in your community via millionmanmarch.org. We'll also post the information via mbjc.org and across digital platforms at MBJC on the Move and amongst our partners, including those featured here. Because brotherhood that liberates all of us is not built on one conversation. We know it's built in conversations that we choose to have honestly with love and commitment to freedom. Know that this is the beginning, it's not the end. To each of you, my brothers, Reverend Mark Thompson, Pastor Jamal Bryant, and Sean Coleman, thank you for your honesty, your wisdom, and your commitment to this work. And thank you again to everyone who joined us today in love and continued struggle. My hope is that we'll all get free together. Thank you.
Family.